The moment came without warning. 1 second, I was standing in the hallway, trying to explain for the 10th time that I wasn't signing over the house. The next, my mother Catherine's hand shot out in that sharp, impatient way she always had when she'd made up her mind about something. My cousin Mark didn't hesitate. He shoved me hard, and I went straight into the glass door at the end of the hall. It shattered with a noise so loud it felt like my ears were ringing from the inside. Cold air from outside rushed in, mixing with the sting from the cuts across my arms and face. Tiny shards stuck to my sweater and hair. My palms were wet before I even looked down and realized it was blood. My mother stood there, not rushing to help, not even pretending to be shocked. She just watched, arms crossed like she was checking if I was going to get back up or stay down. Mark mumbled something about it being an accident. I knew that was the script, played off as a clumsy misstep, nothing more. The same kind of cover story they'd used before when things got out of hand. My mother nodded once, slow and deliberate, and the message was clear. It was over for me in this house. I stepped over the broken frame and into the snow outside, glass crunching under my boots. My knee ached from where it had hit the floor before I went through the door, but I kept moving. My mother called after me, more of a command than a concern, telling me to come back inside before I made it worse. I didn't answer. The neighbors' houses were close enough that if anyone had been at their windows, they would have seen me bleeding, but no one came out. It was quiet except for the wind. I walked to my car, opened the door carefully so I wouldn't smear blood on the seat, and sat for a second, catching my breath. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I grabbed the small first aid kit I kept in the glove compartment. The antiseptic wipe burned like hell when it touched the cut on my cheek, and I had to grip my teeth to keep from letting out a sound. I used gauze to wrap my hand where a bigger piece of glass had sliced me. Every move was automatic. Years of military training made it second nature to treat an injury fast and keep moving. The house loomed in my rearview mirror, lights glowing in the kitchen window. I could picture them inside, probably talking about how I'd finally lost it, how this would be the excuse they needed. It was almost laughable how predictable they were. I turned the key and started the engine. The heater blew weak, warm air over my face. I didn't have a plan in that exact moment, but I had something more important. The decision that I wasn't going to give them another chance to come at me like that. Driving away felt both fast and slow. Street after street, the snow was untouched, except for my tire tracks. At a stop sign, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles were white. I loosened my hands and flexed my fingers, feeling the pull on the gauze. Denver wasn't far, just over an hour, if the roads stayed clear. I knew where I could stay for the night, not with friends. I wasn't about to drag anyone else into this. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody would think to look right away. As I merged onto the highway, the lights of Havenbrook faded behind me. I glanced at the passenger seat where my bag sat, wallet, phone, a couple changes of clothes, and a folder with documents I'd been smart enough to keep out of the house. My mind was already turning over the details, reviewing the last few months. The strange questions about my accounts, the push to consolidate ownership of the house. The snow started to fall harder, tapping against the windshield in steady bursts. I adjusted the wipers and kept my speed steady, eyes on the road. Whatever had just happened back there wasn't going to be the last move. But the next one, that would be mine. The apartment key was still warm in my hand when I stepped into the empty unit. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and detergent, a sign it hadn't been lived in for weeks. I locked the door behind me, slid the chain into place, and stood still for a moment, letting my shoulders drop. It was the first time all day I'd been somewhere my mother couldn't reach me. I didn't bother turning on all the lights, just the one over the kitchen counter. It was enough to see the basics. Small living room, one bedroom, a bathroom with clean towels folded on the rack. No furniture except a wobbly dining table and two mismatched chairs. It would do. I set my bag on the counter, opened it, and took out the folder of documents. Deed copies, bank statements, insurance policies, and a few military records I'd never trusted to keep in the house. I spread them out in a neat grid, using the table as my planning surface. My hands were steadier now, but the cut on my cheek throbbed with every small movement. I took another antiseptic wipe from my kit and cleaned it again, just to be sure. Military habit, double check everything, even if it hurts. From my phone, I pulled up a secure notes app and started typing a list. Not a diary, not emotions, facts only. Dates, conversations, things I'd noticed. Like how Mark had been around more lately, always with some reason to help with errands. How my mother had brought up estate planning 3 times in the last month, always when it was just the two of us. How the last property tax bill had gone missing from the mailbox until I asked for it directly. I created a column for each year going back 2 years. Under each, I jotted any moment that seemed off. Small at the time, but lined up together. They formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. The radiator kicked on with a dull clang, and I realized the room was colder than I'd thought. I kept my coat on and sat at the table, scrolling through my phone's old call log. I saved every contact that might be useful. My lawyer, Mr. Donovan, a retired police officer I'd once worked with on a veterans outreach project. My friend Alex from the service who now ran a private security firm. I didn't call anyone yet. This wasn't the time for panic or for handing over my problem to someone else. First, I needed the timeline airtight. That way, when I did make a move, there'd be no loose ends. I made a quick trip to the corner store for coffee, canned soup, and a cheap notebook. The snow was coming down harder, catching in my hair as I crossed the street. Back inside, I sat down with the notebook and wrote Phase 1 at the top. Underneath, I laid out the objectives. 1. 2. Secure my docations. 3. Map out the opposition's behavior. 4. Identify potential allies. 5. Look at the leverage. Every bullet point got a sublist. Every sublist got a deadline. I wasn't going to waste the advantage of surprise. I heated the soup on the stove and ate it standing up. Eyes on the table full of papers. Each page was a piece of the puzzle, but there were still gaps. I needed to know more about their current moves, bank activity, real estate filings, anything that would show intent. The clock read just past 11 p.m. when I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and started organizing the documents into labeled envelopes. One for the house, one for personal finances, one for military benefits. The last one I labeled for Mr. Donovan. Though I hadn't called my lawyer yet, the name felt like a promise. By the time I finished, the snow outside was a solid white blanket, muting the noise from the street below. I pulled the blinds shut and checked the locks. My coat stayed on the back of the chair, ready to grab. The cut on my hand ached in time with my heartbeat, but I ignored it, moving to the couch and lying back with the notebook on my chest. The heater hummed in the background, steady and low. I stared at the ceiling, running through the timeline again in my head, slotting each event into place. There was no need to rehearse what had happened earlier. The sound of breaking glass and my mother's eyes on me were burned into memory. That wasn't going anywhere. What mattered now was that every step from here would be deliberate, controlled, and on my terms. The sharp click of the pen in my hand brought back a sound I hadn't heard in years. The same click I used to make while waiting in briefing rooms overseas. Back then, it was dusty tents in Iraq or dim trailers in Afghanistan, the air thick with diesel fumes and the faint scent of gun oil. I'd sit at a folding table with a stack of supply manifests, knowing that every box I checked or redlined meant someone in the field either got what they needed or went without. Logistics was never glamorous, but it was life or death if you understood the chain. My job was to make sure the chain didn't break. That meant planning 3 steps ahead, building backups for the backups, and never letting anyone know the full scope of the plan unless they absolutely needed to. The enemy could be anyone. Insurgents, corrupt contractors, even people wearing the same uniform. I learned early that trust was rationed more tightly than ammunition. I shifted in the apartment chair, the notebook open in front of me. Same rules applied here. Different battlefield, same mindset. My mother and Mark weren't armed with rifles, but they had something just as dangerous. Control over the narrative and a willingness to cross lines without blinking. I thought about the times in deployment when we'd had to move supplies under blackout conditions, relying on night vision goggles and whispered coordinates. The key wasn't just stealth, it was making sure no one even knew there was something to look for in the first place. If they didn't see you move it, they couldn't block you from getting it where it needed to go. That was how my 25 million had to be handled. Quiet, invisible, already out of their reach before they knew it was in play. Leaning back, I scanned the notes from last night. I circled 3 names. Alex Hayes, Mr. Donovan, Sam Baker. Each one could be an asset, but only if approached correctly. You don't just pull in allies, you test them first. See if they're reliable under pressure. I'd start with Alex. She'd been in my unit during my second deployment, and I'd seen her handle a supply route ambush without flinching. These days, she ran a private security outfit in Denver, specializing in corporate intel and recovery. If anyone could help me map out my opponent's moves without tipping them off, it was her. But even before I reached out, I needed more eyes on my own blind spots. In the military, before you moved, you ran a risk assessment, every variable on the board, worst case scenario included. Here, that meant asking myself, what if they already had access to my accounts? What if they'd forged my signature on something I hadn't seen yet? What if they were planning to move faster than I was? I grabbed the folder marked House and flipped through the property tax statements, utility bills, and mortgage documents. Everything looked normal. When people are planning to take something from you, they often make sure you see nothing out of place until it's already gone. I remembered one op in Afghanistan where our forward operating base was running low on critical medical supplies. The shipment logs showed nothing unusual, every crate accounted for on paper. But when the medics opened the boxes, half of them were stuffed with outdated Salin bags and broken equipment. The paperwork was perfect. The reality was garbage. That's when I learned that a clean record can be the biggest red flag of all. The same might be happening here. My mother had always been meticulous with paperwork, almost to the point of obsession. If Mark was feeding her ways to make changes quietly, there'd be no obvious trail. That was where Alex's skill set came in. I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Short and direct. Need to meet. Sensitive. Secure location. Call from a clean line? I didn't sign it. She'd know who it was. Years of working together built a kind of shorthand you didn't have to explain. While I waited for her reply, I went through the personal finances envelope. Investments, savings accounts, pension details, military benefits, all intact. But intact didn't mean safe. If they could get a forged power of attorney, they could start moving funds before I even knew. My next note in the margin, shift assets ASAP, create new trust. Non-family trustee. The radiator popped and hissed in the corner. The sound oddly similar to the pressure release on a transport truck's air brakes. My mind kept cross-referencing past missions, convoys, supply swaps, covert drop-offs. Every one of them boiled down to the same principles. Secure your resources, know your terrain, and control the flow of information. A buzz from my phone broke the rhythm. Alex had texted back. Call in 30. Same protocols, short, efficient, no wasted words. Exactly what I needed. I stood, stretched my legs, and poured a cup of coffee from the small pot I'd set up earlier. The bitter steam curled up to my face, grounding me in the present. Outside, the snow was lighter now, the streets slushy and dark under the streetlights. Somewhere across town, Catherine and Mark were making their own plans, certain I'd been scared off for good. I took a slow sip, watching the ripples in the coffee. They had no idea the fight they just started wasn't going to be one they could control. Alex's voice came through the secure line exactly on time. crisp and focused. She didn't waste breath asking how I'd been. She knew a call like this meant I was already knee-deep in a problem. I laid out the basics. No names, no emotional detours. Just the incident, the pressure over the house, and the odd gaps in my paperwork. She didn't even pause before saying, "I'll run a quiet sweep. Give me 48 hours. Hanging up, I felt the shift. This wasn't just me reacting anymore. I had eyes in the field. I pulled on my coat and boots and stepped outside. The snow was mostly melted now, leaving patches of slick ice on the sidewalks. I kept my hood up as I walked to the bus stop, avoiding the car in case Mark recognized it. If they were watching for me, I wanted them looking in the wrong places. First stop was a hardware store on the east side of town, where one of my old neighbors, Mr. Henderson, worked part-time. Retired Marine, sharp as ever. Mr. Henderson had a habit of hearing things without anyone realizing they were talking near him. He didn't seem surprised to see me, just raised an eyebrow and handed me a bag of rock salt without asking. We chatted about nothing for a minute before I slipped in. "Heard anything about my place?" His answer was casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Shin your cousin around there more than you lately? Some guys in a truck delivered boxes last week, not furniture." That was enough to confirm they were moving things in or out, possibly setting up for a bigger change. From there, I walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop where Margaret's Bridge Club met every Thursday morning. It wasn't Thursday, but the owner, Beth, kept a mental record of her regulars. Over a cup of black coffee, she told me my mother had been there 2 days ago with a man Beth didn't recognize, not Mark. Said they talked for an hour about property opportunities. Beth's voice dipped lower when she added, "She paid cash for her coffee." "Never does that." I thanked her, left a generous tip, and made my way to the public library. The quiet hum of the building was a cover for what I was there to do. Use one of their public computers to search county property and court records. Nothing under my name had changed yet, but I flagged a recent query. My parcel number had been pulled up 3 times in the last week from an IP address linked to a law firm in Havenbrook, not mine. I wrote the firm's name down, tucked the note into my wallet, and kept digging. Mortgage, taxes, utilities, everything still active in my name. But the activity log showed the utilities had been accessed online by someone other than me. Either they had my login or they'd guessed their way in. Both options told me the same thing. They were getting ready to make a move. On the way back to the apartment, I stopped at a small print shop. The owner, a guy named Walter who'd done work for the VFW, made me 3 sets of color copies of all my key documents. I paid in cash and asked him to seal each set in separate envelopes. One I kept. The other 2 I'd place in different safe locations that night. Back inside the apartment, I laid everything out on the table and started marking up a large sheet of paper like it was a mission map. On the left side, known players Catherine, Mark, unknown lawyer, possible real estate contact. On the right, resources, my accounts, the house deed, my military pension, the trust I was going to set up. Between them, a space for intel gaps. I drew lines connecting the pieces, marking each with notes. Mark present during incident. Catherine meeting with unknown man. Boxes delivered. Possible removal or staging. The gaps stood out like unlit areas on a satellite map. That was where I needed Alex's report to fill in the dark. By late afternoon, I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease just enough to know the recon was working. Every point of contact had given me something concrete. The next step would be verifying patterns. Where they went, who they met, what they moved. I poured another coffee and stood at the window, watching the street below. A delivery truck slowed in front of the building, idled for a few seconds, then moved on. I kept my eyes on it until it turned the corner. The driver might have just been lost, but I wasn't going to start assuming anything was innocent. The first thing I noticed when I walked into Alex's office was that she'd rearranged the furniture since the last time I was there. 2 chairs now faced the desk head, on, and there was nothing on the surface except a closed laptop and a black recorder about the size of my palm. She nodded toward the chair on the right, and I sat without taking off my coat. She didn't bother with small talk. "You're right. They're moving." She slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages between Mark and Catherine. The headers had been scrubbed, but the timestamps told me these weren't old. Just 3 nights ago, Mark had written, "She's stubborn, but we'll get her out. Once she's not in the house, we can push the transfer." Catherine replied, "She'll fold." I know what buttons to press. My pulse stayed even, but I could feel my jaw tightening. I set the papers aside and she pulled the recorder closer. "This is better," she said, pressing play. The audio was grainy, but their voices were unmistakable. Mark first, low and agitated. "She won't sign. We might have to force it." Then Catherine, calm as ever, "She'll be out soon. Just keep the paperwork ready." There was a pause. Then the scrape of a chair. Mark again. "What if she fights it?" Catherine's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Then we make it look like an accident." People believe accidents. I'd heard a lot of ugly things in my life, but that one sentence hit harder than the shove through the glass door. I leaned back in the chair. The plastic armrests cool under my hands. Alex let the tape run a little longer, enough to hear them shift topics to money. That was when Mark said something that froze the air in the room. "Once we have the deed, we can leverage it. That'll give us enough to cover the investment loss." I didn't ask what investment loss meant. I already knew Mark's track record with bad deals. Alex stopped the recording and set the device down. "You want me to pull call logs next? I can get you the last 6 months without raising flags." I nodded once. She knew my style, no big reactions, no declarations, just moved to the next step. I tucked the envelope into my bag and stood. "On the way out," she added, "keep your phone clean. No direct contact with either of them unless it's recorded." That had already been my plan. Back at the apartment, I set the papers and recorder on the table next to my map. The lines between names and notes were starting to look less like a spider web and more like a net. They weren't being careful anymore. The arrogance in those messages told me they thought I was isolated, maybe even scared. I made coffee and let it cool on the counter while I pulled a small cassette player from a storage bin. I'd kept it from my army days. Reliable, simple, no internet connection. I copied the audio from Alex's recorder onto a fresh tape, then labeled it Primary Evidence 01. 2 duplicates went into separate padded envelopes. One would go to a safe deposit box. The other I'd leave with Mr. Donovan once I decided it was time to bring him in. The coffee was lukewarm by the time I drank it, but it kept my hands busy as I replayed the recording in my head. Catherine's voice didn't waver once. Mark sounded like a man eager to impress, ready to do whatever she told him. That combination, her control and his recklessness, was dangerous. I pulled out my notebook and added 2 new objectives under Phase 2. Compile all physical evidence, multiple formats, begin controlled exposure of their actions to select allies. Evidence only mattered if it was protected and admissible. In the service, I'd seen entire operations unravel because someone skipped the chain of custody. I wasn't making that mistake here. By late afternoon, the light outside had dimmed enough that the apartment felt smaller. I turned on the overhead fixture, its buzz filling the quiet. My eyes drifted back to the envelope from Alex. The text messages were damning, but the tape was the kind of proof one couldn't explain away. The cold precision in Catherine's voice was the same tone she used on me when I was a kid, telling me what I was allowed to want. I slid the recorder into my coat pocket and grabbed my keys. There was one more place I needed to stop before the night was over, a storage unit on the edge of town. I'd rented it under a Shell LLC years ago, mostly to keep extra gear and a few keepsakes I didn't trust to leave anywhere else. Tonight, it would become the first vault for what I was collecting. The wind had picked up by the time I stepped outside, carrying the smell of snow again. I locked the apartment door and walked to my car, head down, one hand in my pocket on the recorder. It felt heavier than it was. The storage unit door rolled up with a metallic groan echoing in the empty corridor. Inside, the cold bit at my hands as I stepped over boxes and crates I hadn't touched in years. In the back corner, under a faded army duffel, was a waterproof case with a combination lock. I spun the dials, popped it open, and slipped the cassette and one set of document copies inside. Once the lock clicked shut again, I slid the case into a heavy-duty storage bin, stacked 2 boxes of old camping gear on top, and pulled a tarp over the whole thing. The kind of camouflage that only looked like clutter to anyone snooping. By the time I got back to the apartment, it was past 9 p.m., and my phone showed a single missed call from Sam Baker. I'd left him a secure voicemail earlier in the day, hinting at a time-sensitive asset shift. Sam wasn't just a financial advisor. He'd worked with military families for 2 decades, and he knew exactly how to move money without setting off alarms. I called him back from the Secure app. "I need everything pulled from my existing accounts," I said. "Liquid," then moved into a new trust under an independent trustee. No family connections, no loopholes. His voice didn't change pitch. "We can do that. I'll draft the trust agreement tonight. You'll need a name for it." "The Whitaker Center for Women Veterans?" I replied without hesitation. It sounded like the kind of legitimate nonprofit no one would question. Because it was going to be one. Only this one would have my assets as its foundation, locked away from anyone who thought they could leverage them. Sam asked a few more verification questions, then got to the point. "Once we initiate the transfer, you've got about 24 hours before anyone who's monitoring will see the accounts go dark." "That's all the time I need," I told him. We ended the call and I immediately rang Mr. Donovan. He'd been my lawyer for over a decade, a man who treated every case like a chess game. I didn't explain the whole situation, just told him we needed to finalize a trust filing and put in place a defensive estate structure. He agreed to meet me first thing in the morning. On the kitchen table, I spread out the personal finances envelope again, checking account numbers and holdings. It was like running pre-mission checks before moving a convoy. Miss one detail and the whole operation could get compromised. I printed fresh copies of every statement, then scanned the originals into a secure encrypted drive I kept on a separate laptop with no wireless card. The laptop had a fresh OS install, no browser history, no accounts saved. Around midnight, Sam sent a secure document link. The trust paperwork was clean, irrevocable, fully funded upon transfer with a professional trustee firm in Denver. I read every line, making sure no clause left an opening for my mother or Mark to challenge it. Then I digitally signed and sent it back. 15 minutes later, he confirmed. "Transfer initiated. Funds will clear by 10 a.m. tomorrow." I leaned back in my chair. The relief was muted but solid. That money wasn't just numbers in an account. It was years of deployments, hazard pay, smart investments, and a few lucky stock picks in military supply companies. It was also my safety net. And now it was untouchable. Still, there was more to secure. The house wasn't just a structure. It was history. My father had built it himself after leaving the Navy, and I wasn't about to let it get pawned off to cover Mark's mistakes. That meant getting ahead of whatever paperwork they were drafting. I drafted an affidavit stating I had no intention of selling, transferring, or gifting the property, and that any such document with my name on it would be fraudulent. Mr. Donovan would file it with the county clerk in the morning, adding another layer of defense. Before shutting down for the night, I sent Alex a short update. Funds moved. Trust locked, house affidavit in motion. She replied with a thumbs up emoji, the only time she'd allow herself to use one. I set the burner phone on the counter, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the table with my notebook. Under Phase 2 I crossed off, shift assets, and established trust, 2 solid wins. The rest of the page was still full of open objectives. But for the first time since I'd left the house, I felt like the ground under me was steady. Outside, the streetlights glinted off wet pavement. The snow was almost gone now. Somewhere across town, Catherine and Mark probably still believed my money was within reach. They'd find out soon enough that it wasn't, and by then they'd have bigger problems. The courthouse lobby was warm enough to make me peel off my gloves, but I kept my coat on. Mr. Donovan was already there holding a folder that looked too thin for the amount of work I'd just dropped on him. We didn't bother with pleasantries. He handed me a single-page draft, my affidavit against any unauthorized transfer of the house. It was clean, direct, and left no space for creative interpretation. "I'll file it today," he said. "From this point on, you don't speak to them directly. Every word goes through me." That had been my plan all along. In the Army, rules of engagement weren't just about when you could fire. They were about how you kept control of the fight. Same here, no yelling matches, no hallway confrontations, no answering quick question calls. Every communication would be documented, routed, and preserved as evidence. Back at the apartment, I swapped my main phone's SIM card for a prepaid one. The old number would stay active, but I wouldn't be touching it. Mr. Donovan would field anything that came through. My new number went to exactly 3 people: Mr. Donovan, Sam Baker, and Alex Hayes. By mid-afternoon, I'd already tested the system. Mark sent a text to my old number. "We need to talk. Don't make this harder than it has to be." 30 seconds later, Mr. Donovan forwarded me a screenshot with the note, "Documented." A few hours later, another one came through. "You're not thinking clearly. This is family. Don't ruin everything," I didn't reply. Mr. Donovan logged it, time-stamped, and then filed it in a new folder labeled Harassment Mark Whitaker. I also kept my own parallel record. Not because I didn't trust Mr. Donovan, he was meticulous, but because you never rely on just one set of files. I wrote down each message in my notebook, noting tone, wording, and whether it was sent during business hours or late at night. Patterns matter in court, and they also tell you when someone's rattled. Alex called just after 5:00. "Got a tail on Mark for the last 2 days. He's been at your house twice, but no sign he went inside. He's also met with that unknown male from the coffee shop sighting." She paused. "Guy's name is David Price. Real estate broker, not the good kind." That connected more dots than I liked. A broker meant they were already thinking about listing or leveraging the property, and Price had a reputation. Alex described him as the type who could get a condemned warehouse sold for double market value if he found the right buyer in the right hurry. The next call was Sam. "Funds cleared to the trust this morning. The trustee's office has everything they need. Anyone trying to challenge will hit a locked door." His tone was matter of fact, but I knew it was his version of a victory lap. With my money locked and the house affidavit in process, the rules of engagement became my shield. If they wanted to get to me, they'd have to go through a wall of legal protocol. That alone would slow them down. But slowing them wasn't enough. I needed them to start making mistakes. I decided to test the waters. Using my old phone, I sent Mr. Donovan a short statement for him to pass along to Catherine. "Any matters regarding property or finances must be addressed in writing to my attorney." That's it. No emotion, no explanation. The kind of line that sounds harmless but carries weight. By evening, Mr. Donovan forwarded me her reply. "You don't have to be like this. We can still work it out between us." The wording was almost soft, but I recognized the undertone. Pressure masked as concern. I closed my notebook after logging it. Every piece of contact was now another thread in the net I was tightening. They'd think they were still in control, but every message, every attempt to smooth things over was just more rope. The next morning, the smell of strong coffee was still in the air when Alex texted, "Market Chamber of Commerce real estate breakfast. David Price present, public event." I didn't waste time. I pulled on a blazer, tied my hair back, and left the apartment with a folder tucked under my arm. The event was at a mid-tier hotel on Main Street, the kind that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and over-brewed coffee. Rows of round tables filled the conference room, each with a little placard announcing the local businesses seated there. I walked in without signing the registration sheet, scanning the crowd as if I belonged. Mark spotted me before I saw him. His eyes widened, then narrowed in that way people do when they're trying to decide if they should smile or glare. I didn't break stride. Just walked to the coffee station and poured a cup like I had every right to be there. Price was next to him, leaning in to say something, but I could see Mark's attention shift fully to me. That was the first win, pulling his focus without speaking a word. I took a seat at an empty table near theirs, set the folder down where he could see it, and started jotting notes on a legal pad. I didn't look at him directly, but I knew he was watching. The folder didn't actually hold anything sensitive. It was filled with blank paper, but the point was never about the contents. The point was to make him wonder. During the introductions, I clapped politely for each speaker, sipped my coffee, and kept writing. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Price leaning toward Mark again. Mark's jaw was tight, perfect. When the meeting broke for networking, I took my coffee with me, and passed by their table slowly enough for Mark to get a good look at me. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but Price put a hand on his arm, stopping him. I didn't stop walking. Outside, the air was cool, and I could hear the faint hum of Main Street traffic. Alex was parked a block away, watching from her SUV. I got in the passenger seat and handed her the coffee cup, still half full. "He didn't like that?" I said. She smirked. "Good. Keep him off balance." We drove past the hotel once more before heading back. Through the glass front, I saw Mark at the registration table talking fast to the coordinator. Maybe he was asking who invited me. Maybe he was trying to figure out if I was working with someone in the room. Either way, it was time he started questioning his own footing. Back at the apartment, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Rex Phase 1 complete." The goal was simple. Make them feel watched without giving them anything to hit back at. Every time they thought they were moving in secret, I'd appear in the periphery. Not enough for them to call it harassment, but just enough to eat at their confidence. 2 hours later, Mr. Donovan emailed me an update. Catherine had called his office wanting to know if I was negotiating through anyone else. She didn't mention the breakfast, but the timing wasn't a coincidence. I told him to simply reply, "All matters are handled by this office." Short, closed, no room for follow-up. By early evening, Alex sent another text. Mark canceled his afternoon meeting. Went home early. Price met someone else at a diner. That was another small victory. Disruption meant their plans were shifting, and shifts create openings. I spent the rest of the night quietly reorganizing my files. Not because they needed it, but because the process kept my mind sharp. Every time I heard the cassette tape click in my thoughts, Catherine's calm voice planning an accident, it reminded me why precision mattered. Out on the street below, a delivery van idled for a few minutes before pulling away. I watched it from the window, calm, patient, already thinking 3 moves ahead. By the time I sat down at Mr. Donovan's office the next morning, the video file was already on his desk. Alex had gotten it from Mr. Henderson, the retired Marine neighbor who'd seen the whole shove through the glass door. He'd pulled the footage off his home security system without hesitation, saying only, "You'll want this in a safe place." The recording was clear enough to remove any doubt. The winter light reflected off the ice on the porch. Catherine's figure in the doorway, Mark standing just behind her. I stepped into frame, talking with my hands in the way I do when I'm trying to keep calm. Catherine glanced back at Mark, gave the smallest nod, and he shoved me hard enough to send me through the door's glass panel. The sound of it breaking was sharp, even through the tiny microphone, followed by the thud of me hitting the floor. Mr. Donovan didn't look away from the screen until the clip ended. "That's assault," he said flatly, and premeditated. "If we pair it with the tape," he slid the recorder toward me. "Do you want to add the audio now or later?" I didn't hesitate. Later meant giving them more time. We queued up the cassette recording from Alex, synced it to the timestamp of the video, and listened as Catherine's voice from a different day lined up with her movements on screen. The effect was damning. From there, Mr. Donovan outlined the legal approach. Step 1, file for a protective order against both of them. Step 2, file a civil suit for assault, property damage, and financial interference. Step 3, request a temporary restraining order blocking any sale, transfer, or lien against the house. I signed everything without flinching. He filed the protective order request that afternoon, submitting the video, audio, and copies of the threatening messages Mark had sent. The clerk didn't hide her expression when she saw the footage. Her eyebrows pulled tight in that way people do when they're angry, but trying to stay professional. By mid-afternoon, Alex sent a quick update. Both Catherine and Mark had been served notice of the pending protective order. She'd tailed Mark afterward and reported that he'd driven aimlessly for an hour before stopping at a bar on the edge of town. At the same time, Sam called to confirm the trust's assets were now fully verified by the trustee's office. "They can throw all the legal noise they want at it," he said. "They're not getting through." That night, I sat at my table with all the paperwork spread out, court filings on one side, trust documents on the other, the property affidavit in between. I wasn't looking at them for reassurance. I was arranging them like pieces in an operation plan, making sure every angle had coverage. A text from Mr. Donovan came in at 8:14 p.m. "Hearing on protective orders scheduled in 2 weeks. All evidence accepted into record," he added. Mark's attorney already asked for a continuance. Denied. I wrote that in my notebook under a new heading, legal offensive. It wasn't about feeling good. It was about keeping track. In the military, you didn't get caught up in whether you won a skirmish. You logged the result, adjusted the plan, and stayed ready for the next engagement. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a car slowed as it passed the building. I stayed seated, pen in hand, and kept writing. Sam's call came early before the sun had cleared the rooftops. "You were right to move fast," he said. "Mark just tried to initiate a land purchase through a shell account using a loan application that lists your house as collateral." I sat up straighter in my chair. "How?" "Submitted a forged authorization letter. Not your signature, but close enough someone might believe it if they weren't looking closely." "Can you block it?" "Already done," Sam replied. The bank froze the account. I also flagged the broker price as a high-risk partner. That should slow him down. The efficiency reminded me of intercepting bad intel before it reached command. Clean, quiet, no announcement. After hanging up, I called Mr. Donovan and filled him in. He told me to send him a copy of the bank's freeze notice for the lawsuit file. "We'll add attempted fraud to the claims," he said. By late morning, Alex texted, "Mark meeting with Price again." Both looked tense. 10 minutes later, she sent another update. Price on phone, pacing in parking lot. "Mark smoking, not talking. That was a good sign. They weren't aligned." I decided to add pressure. I drove to the county clerk's office and pulled public business filings. It didn't take long to find that Price had 2 LLCs in his name, one in good standing, the other delinquent on taxes. I printed both reports. They weren't ammunition yet, but they would be. On the way out, I ran into Beth from the coffee shop. She glanced at the folder in my hands, then leaned closer. "Your cousin was in here yesterday," she said. Arguing on the phone about money. Sounded like someone was telling him no. That was enough to confirm what Sam had told me. They were running into walls and those walls were mine. Back home, I laid the new documents on the table next to the growing evidence stack. Price's delinquent LLC gave me another angle. If he was desperate, he might make a mistake that would drag Mark down with him. Sam called again that afternoon. "One more thing," he said. I checked Mark's credit report, 2 cards maxed, 1 in collections. He's leveraged to the teeth. Without that house as collateral, his latest deal was dead. I wrote it all in my notebook, not because I needed reminding, but because keeping records was part of the discipline. Each entry was another checkpoint in the operation. Proof the mission was advancing. At dusk, Alex sent one last update. Mark dropped price off, drove straight home. No stops. I pictured him sitting in that house, probably on the phone with Catherine. Both of them trying to figure out why nothing was going the way they'd planned. The thought didn't make me smile. It made me focus. I ironed my navy slacks before sunrise and slid the cassette into a clear evidence pouch, the kind with a tamper seal you can spot from across a room. The courthouse doors opened at 8 on the dot. Mr. Donovan met me by the elevators with a nod and the same thin folder that somehow kept expanding every time I saw it. We didn't rehearse. There was nothing to add. The filings spoke for themselves. The hearing room was smaller than television makes it look, fluorescent lights, scuffed carpet, a clock that ticked a half-second too loud. The judge walked in right on time, gray hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose. She looked like someone who had no patience for drama, and even less patience for people who wasted the court's morning. Good. I wasn't here for a performance. Mark sat at the defense table with a lawyer who looked 10 years younger than the suit he was wearing. Catherine took the row behind them, hands folded neatly over her purse. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge like this was a misunderstanding, and we were all about to come to our senses. The clerk called the case. Mr. Donovan stood and introduced us. The defense counsel did the same, voice a little too fast. The way people talk when they're trying to sound confident and checking their notes at the same time. The judge asked if we were ready to proceed. We were. Mr. Donovan started with the basics: the protective order request, the affidavit, the chain of custody for the video and the audio. No adjectives, no flavor, just facts lined up like fence posts. Then he wheeled in a small cart with a monitor on top and handed the clerk a USB drive. The judge gave a single nod. The video came up on the screen. I didn't look away. Outside light, the porch, frost on the railing, the front hall beyond the glass. There I was, arm lifted, palm open, talking, staying level. Catherine's head tipped just a hair, and Mark moved both hands out, a fast shove. I hit the glass, it cracked, then let go. The audio from the camera mic gave a clean, awful crack and a hollow thud. No one spoke. No one needed to. When the clip ended, the judge leaned forward a fraction. "How old is this recording?" she asked. "Dated and time-stamped," Mr. Donovan said, pointing to the overlay pulled directly from the neighbor's system. "His here to authenticate." Mr. Henderson stood, pressed shirt, marine posture, identified the camera, the location, and the export steps. The judge thanked him and turned back to the monitor. Mr. Donovan held up the sealed pouch. "We also have an audio recording," he said. "Different date, same actors. The voices are authenticated by a third party who knows both individuals personally. We will lay foundation." He pressed play. The room filled with the hiss of an old tape. "Mark, she won't sign. We might have to force it. Catherine, she'll be out soon. Keep the paperwork ready." Another beat. "Mark, what if she fights it?" "Catherine, steady, then we make it look like an accident. People believe accidents." The judge's pen stopped moving. The defense lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the audio lacks context." "It has plenty," the judge said without looking at him. "Continue." Mr. Donovan didn't push. He let the tape run 10 more seconds into the part where they moved to money. "Once we have the deed, leverage, cover the loss." And then he clicked it off. He handed up the transcript, the certification from Alex's firm, and a short affidavit explaining the recovery process from the cassette player in the garage. Chain of custody, again, neat and clean. Next came the paper trail. Mr. Donovan slid documents across to the clerk, screenshots of Mark's text to me, his follow-up messages to the old number after my attorney notice, and the bank's freeze letter tied to a fraudulent authorization referencing my house. He didn't dramatize any of it. He just pointed to dates, signatures, and the parts any rational person would notice, even on a bad day. The judge shifted to the defense. "Counsel," Mark's lawyer tried for concern, "this is a family dispute that escalated. My client regrets the argument." Emotions were high. The push was a reflex, not an attack. As for the audio, we dispute its authenticity and the implication it relates to the incident on video. The judge looked at the monitor, then at him. The video shows force. The audio shows planning. If you have something more persuasive than adjectives, use it. He tried again. My client was trying to protect his relatives' interests by forging authorizations and discussing an accident. The judge said, "Sit down." She turned to Catherine. "Ma'am, do you wish to make a statement?" Catherine folded her hands tighter. "My daughter has always misunderstood my intentions," she said, voice even. "I never planned to harm her. I've managed our family's affairs for decades. I believed she needed guidance." The judge nodded once. Noted. Donovan called me to the stand. I swore in, sat, and kept my answers short. I described the push, the glass, the injury, the silence. After, I confirmed the texts were received on my phone and forwarded to my attorney without reply. I verified the trust transfer and the affidavit filed to protect the property. Mr. Donovan asked if I had ever authorized Mark, Catherine, or anyone else to use my home as collateral. "No," I said, "not once." He asked if I had provoked a physical confrontation. I asked them to stop pressuring me to sign. That's it. And even if I had, that doesn't make a shove through a glass door an accident. They moved on. Mr. Henderson testified next to authenticate the video. Alex followed with a narrow scope: how the audio was recovered, how the file was preserved, and how the voices were identified. She didn't editorialize, she never does. The judge asked a few questions of her own. How long between the audio and the incident, whether any edits were made, whether metadata lined up. Each answer was clear, technical, and supported by the paperwork. When testimony wrapped, Mr. Donovan made a short request. Issue the protective order, freeze any attempt to transfer or encumber the house, and set the civil claims for a full hearing. He didn't ask for the moon. He asked for the steps the evidence justified. The judge took a moment, flipping through the stack, stopping at the transcript, then at the freeze letter, then at the still frame of the shove. She set the file down. "Protective order granted," she said. "No contact by any means, direct or indirect. Any violation will be addressed immediately. Temporary restraining order granted on the property. No transfer, no lien, no listing, no approach to lenders until this court says otherwise. The civil matter is set for full review. Counsel will receive dates by end of day. I strongly suggest everyone here read my orders carefully." Mark stared at the table. His lawyer whispered something that didn't reach him. Catherine's face didn't move, but her fingers dug into the leather of her purse. The clerk stamped the orders. Mr. Donovan thanked the court and handed me copies. As we stepped into the hallway, the paper felt heavier than it was, like the kind of weight you don't mind carrying, because it means something's finally where it belongs. I tucked the orders into my folder, checked the seals on the evidence pouches, and headed for the stairs without breaking stride. The sky over Havenbrook was still gray when I walked back into the courthouse for the civil hearing. No cameras, no reporters, just the same scuffed hallway, the same low hum of the vending machine outside the courtroom. Mr. Donovan was already inside, sorting the exhibits into neat stacks. Catherine and Mark sat at the defense table again, this time farther apart. The only talking between them came in low, quick bursts. Their lawyer kept shuffling papers like the answer might be hiding somewhere in the stack. The judge came in right on schedule, reading from her notes before anyone said a word. She started with the facts already established: the video of the shove, the authenticated audio of the conversation about forcing me out, the fraudulent authorization letter, and the attempted property lion. She didn't ask for repetition. She already had it all in the record. "Based on the evidence," she said, "the court finds the defendants engaged in coordinated actions to remove the plaintiff from her property using physical force and fraudulent financial instruments." Her tone didn't change, but every word landed solid. Mr. Donovan requested permanent injunctions, one to bar them from the property, another to prohibit any financial action in my name without my notarized consent. He also asked for damages for the cost of repairs, medical bills, and legal fees. The defense tried to minimize. This was a family conflict, the lawyer said. Our clients regret the escalation and are willing to work toward reconciliation without further legal penalties. The judge looked up from the file. Regret is not a defense against assault and fraud. It's also not the purpose of this court to mediate family relationships. We deal with actions, not intentions. She granted both injunctions in full. She ordered Mark to pay damages for repairs and medical costs, and Catherine to reimburse legal expenses tied directly to the fraudulent transactions. Payment schedules were set with the warning that any delay would result in liens against their personal assets. Assets they couldn't touch mine to cover. When the judge read the final order, the sound of the gavel wasn't dramatic. It was a flat, sharp tap like closing a case file. The clerk handed Mr. Donovan certified copies, each page stamped in red. Catherine didn't stand when the judge left. She stayed seated, eyes fixed on the table. Mark got up fast, shoulders tight, and walked out without looking back. I didn't follow their movements. I focused on the paperwork in my hands. The permanent barriers they could no longer cross. In the hallway, Mr. Donovan exhaled for the first time all morning. You've got your property locked, your funds secure, and the court orders to keep them away. That's as airtight as it gets. It wasn't about winning. It was about control, mine, restored completely. We stepped out into the cold air. The sky was clearing and the snow melt ran in small streams along the curb. The orders stayed tucked under my arm, their weight steady as I crossed the street toward my car. Each step was grounded in the fact that there was nothing left for them to take. The first contractor showed up 2 days after the verdict, still in a paint-splattered jacket and carrying a clipboard that looked like it had been through a war. I walked him through the house, pointing out the damaged door frame, the glass that needed replacing, and the old wiring in the back rooms. He gave me a rough estimate, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. So, what are you turning this place into? A training center? I said, for women, veterans, and women dealing with hostile family situations. Somewhere they can learn skills, get resources, and not have to explain themselves. By the following week, the sound of hammers and saws filled the rooms. Fresh drywall went up, new locks were installed, and the front porch got reinforced glass instead of the fragile kind that had shattered under Mark's shove. Every nail driven felt like a line drawn. This space was mine, and it was staying that way. I moved in a few basic pieces of furniture, nothing fancy, just solid and functional. The dining room became a conference space. The den turned into a small classroom with a whiteboard, folding tables, and enough chairs for 12 people. The upstairs bedrooms were cleared out to make room for temporary stays, clean beds, stocked closets, and secure storage for personal belongings. Alex came by one afternoon, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed. "Place looks good," she said. "You're going to need a sign." I'd already ordered one. Simple black lettering on brushed steel. Whitaker Center for Women Veterans. It arrived the next day, and we bolted it to the front wall together. The opening was small and quiet. No ribbon, cutting, no speeches, just a few friends, a couple of other vets, and a fresh pot of coffee on the counter. We sat around the conference table swapping stories that didn't need to be explained twice. Late that evening, after everyone left, I locked up and went through the mail stacked on the hallway table. In the middle was a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single photograph, me as a kid, standing in front of the house with Catherine, both of us smiling. No note, no date written on the back. I set it down on the table without a word. The walls around me were solid, the locks secure, and for the first time in a long time, the space felt exactly like it should. The photo stayed on the table overnight. In the morning, I slid it into a folder along with the rest of the documents I'd kept from the case. It wasn't evidence anymore, just part of the record. Everything had a place now, and that folder belonged in the locked cabinet in my office upstairs. With the cabinet closed, I sat at the desk and opened my notebook, the same one I'd been carrying since I left this house the night of the glass door. Page after page was filled with dates, names, actions, and results. I went through each entry slowly, drawing a line through the ones that were finished. Protective order granted, property locked, trust secured, renovations complete. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall, drifting in quiet sheets over the yard. The new reinforced glass at the front door caught the light differently, bending it instead of letting it pass straight through. I made coffee and carried the mug to the upstairs window. From here, I could see the sign we'd bolted to the wall, Whitaker Center for Women Veterans. Steady against the weather. It wasn't there for show. It was there because sometimes survival meant creating a place where no one could push you out again. Catherine was in a nursing facility now, according to the last public record I checked. Mark had moved to another county. Neither of them had the right to contact me under the injunctions, and neither had tried. Silence in this case was the cleanest proof of success. The day passed without interruption. Visits from 2 women interested in the center's programs, a quick delivery of training manuals from a local nonprofit, and a phone call from Sam confirming the trust's quarterly report. Every detail was on track, every safeguard holding. By evening, the snow had piled up on the porch railing. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the quiet street, then closed and locked the door behind me. Justice didn't need to shout. It didn't need to make a scene. It needed to be accurate, deliberate, and final. And standing there with the lock set and the house warm, I knew I'd hit every mark. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. I walked through each room slowly, touching the edges of the door frames, the cool surface of the new glass, the sturdy lock on the front door. Every part of it was intact because I'd made it that way, step by step, without noise, without wasted motion. It wasn't about getting even. It was about making sure no one could undo what I'd built. Revenge fades, control lasts. If this story resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We are always listening to stories of resilience and courage. If you'd like to learn more about how we can support one another, be sure to subscribe and share this channel.